Keep learning, keep learning, the Tom Daniel Show. Keep listening, keep learning, the Tom Daniel Show.
You're listening to the Tom Daniel Show, and I'm your host, Tom Daniel. I bet you never thought you'd see the words Pocahontas, Abolitionist, and Confederate in the same sentence, right? You know, it sounds like the setup for a joke, but what's the punchline? Well, my crack legal team here on the Tom Daniel Show has advised me that I should start this edition of Tangled Roots with a disclaimer. Personally, I think it's a terrible idea to have to start anything with a disclaimer. But these are definitely interesting times in which we live. Therefore, since I will be talking a little about the Powhatan Indians of Virginia in this episode, I must establish right up front that I am politically allowed to talk about the Powhatan Indian culture because they are literally my tribe. I am a descendant of the Chief Powhatan, and I can say Indian, 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 Indian all day long as many times as I want. So there. We often think about history as being something black and white. Everything neatly categorized one way or the other, and history makes sense that way. It's kind of soothing how the narratives get simplified over time. We're not threatened. We're not challenged. We just happily accept things and life goes on. However, when you're dealing with real people who had real lives, things don't always go as expected, and they don't behave and fit neatly into those little category boxes. Individual lives and family stories can get so much more tangled than the big picture suggests and complicates all those easy assumptions we make about history. So in this installment of Tangled Roots, my family tree series, I want to look under the hood of the simplified history we've been fed and play with some historical curveballs that trample all over what you thought you knew. And there's no better place to find a big old load of historical irony than my own family tree. My 11th great-grandfather was Chief Opechancanough Powhatan, who was the brother of the paramount chief of the Powhatans that was the father of Pocahontas. Although I am related to Pocahontas, I'm not descended from her, as I am descended from her uncle instead. Opechancanough took over as paramount chief of the Powhatan Confederacy after the death of Pocahontas' father in 1618, and Chief Opechancanough was the one who engineered the infamous Jamestown Massacre of 1622. The initial conditions in Jamestown Colony, which was settled by English Cavaliers in 1607, were pretty horrible. I mean, the colony came within an eyelash of starving itself right out of existence right off the bat because they had no clue what to do. I mean, they were definitely not preppers. At first, they established a good relationship with the Powhatan Indians and traded with them frequently for necessary supplies. However, Captain John Smith recognized the serious flaw in this arrangement because, although it temporarily solved some issues, the colonists were not learning how to live independently and fend for themselves. It was a stopgap, but not a sustainable long-term strategy. Soon this would lead to their near-starvation situation, forcing Captain Smith to set a new firm policy for the future of Jamestown. If you don't work, you don't eat. A little colonial tough love there. This became the key to the ultimate survival and thriving of Jamestown. People who weren't used to manual labor learned to stop relying so heavily on the Indians for everything and take care of themselves. They recovered, and they began to thrive. It was a turning point towards self-sufficiency. Oh, by the way, the typical workday for Jamestown colonists was only 3 or 4 hours each day. Yeah, they didn't kill themselves with sunrise to sunset back-breaking work, because with everyone in the colony diversified in their skills and contributions, they didn't have to. They had plenty of leisure time on their hands, and Captain Smith required them to spend it usefully. So they didn't just lounge around on the couch all afternoon. They played music, they danced, they read books, played games, they sewed, they prayed, they whittled, they tinkered with building things, they hunted and fished. Hey, I finished digging up some stumps, now it's time for my fiddle practice. And once they got their feet under them, they were really living the dream in Jamestown Colony. That was until Opechancanough decided they were thriving just a little too much to suit him. He tried to wipe them out with a series of coordinated Trojan War style of sneak attacks inside the colony and all up and down the James River all at once, killing about a fourth of their total population in just one day. This would be known historically as the Jamestown Massacre. Basically, the Indians casually strolled into the homes of the colonists with items in hand to trade, smiling, friendly, which was a common behavior for them. However, once inside, they grabbed whatever weapon they could get their hands on and slaughtered everybody within reach. Chief Opechancanough expected the colonists to behave the same way Indians do when they're defeated in battle like that. Quit and leave. Cut their losses and go home. That was his goal, humiliate and terrorize the English completely into leaving. But the colonists didn't leave. They were unexpectedly resilient. They dug in and fought back. They used the massacre as motivation for the next 10 solid years of aggressive counterattacks against the Powhatans. Opechancanoug's plan of launching demoralizing tactical strikes wasn't a sustainable plan, and the Indians weren't prepared at all for a prolonged war against a superior enemy force of growing numbers and better weapons. Their only hope had been for a quick war that would turn the public's stomach. But that didn't happen. If only Opechancanough had known that wars of attrition were the only kind of wars the English ever fought. The Powhatan Confederacy weakened under the mounting pressure from the English until they ended up being the ones to surrender. Ironically, over 200 years later, General Robert E. Lee would employ very similar tactics as the Powhatans and face the exact same results. But old Opechancanough, boy, he never stopped fighting. Tragically defiant to the very end, he spent his entire life as paramount chief trying to drive the English out of Virginia. And he launched his final attack on them at the age of 90. He always fought for his people, no matter what. He was always true to his beliefs. He never allowed himself to be reconstructed by the victors, even in the face of overwhelming odds. Chief Opechancanough remained loyal to his culture and heritage, and fierce to the end. His whole life was a story of defiance and resistance, trying to protect the Powhatan land and their way of life from an overbearing colonial power, and against impossible odds. He fought bravely for what he believed, and his people were all proud and independent. Now, he was eventually captured and shot in the back at the age of 92 in Jamestown. His daughter, my 10th great-grandmother, Princess Nickety, ironically married an English trader named John Reese Hughes. Princess Nickety Powhatan and Trader Hughes had a daughter named Anne, who married a Pollard. Now, 4 more generations of Pollards followed. Their son George, his son Frederick, and then his son Joshua, and then his daughter Celia Jane Pollard. Celia Jane married a Goodson, and their daughter Penelope Goodson was my 4th great-grandmother. She married my 4th great-grandfather, Theophilus Daniel, and the two of them moved their family from Georgia to Alabama Territory in late 1817, 2 years before Alabama even became a state. My family has been in Alabama longer than there's been in Alabama. Theophilus and Penelope had 14 children, and their second boy, Abel Daniel, was my 3rd great-grandfather. Abel's second boy, John H. Daniel, my great-great-grandfather, was born in Butler County, Alabama in 1838. and he became a soldier in the Confederate Army. He served alongside 2 of his brothers, 3 uncles, and his 6 first cousins. That's a lot of Daniels fighting for the Confederacy right there. John H. Daniel's uncle Zachariah was the company captain until he was killed at Hatcher's Run 10 days before the surrender in 1865. And his other uncle, John Adams Daniel, was 4th lieutenant in Company H of the 59th Alabama Infantry and present at the Appomattox Courthouse surrender. On the morning after Lee's surrender, John Adams Daniel cut a stick from a tree and used it as an aid in his long walk back home to Alabama, which took him 30 days. That stick is still in the possession of a cousin of mine in Cocoa, Florida. That is incredible. A physical piece of that moment carried all that way. What a connection. After returning to Alabama, John Adams Daniel became postmaster at Camp Creek, Alabama, which he renamed Honoraville in honor of his niece Nora, who was his brother Zachariah's daughter. And it was named to honor Nora, or Honoraville. The community still carries that name to this day. I've spoken of John Adams Daniel in previous segments of Tangled Roots. My great-great-grandfather, Private John H. Daniel, enlisted in Company H of the 59th Alabama Infantry in March of 1862. In his first action of the war, he was stationed 2 months later on Drury's Bluff along the James River in Virginia to prevent Union ships and Marines from sailing up the river and reaching Richmond. It was a major Confederate victory, as the Union was forced to withdraw and Confederate losses were shockingly minimal, only 7 killed and 8 wounded. Unfortunately, John H. Daniel was one of the 8 wounded, as he was shot through the neck and shoulder on the last day of battle. Oh, and by the way, this is the exact same James River in Virginia that his ancestor, Chief Opechancanough of the Powhatan Confederacy, launched sneak attacks against an invading force moving up the river. Man, history is rhyming like crazy here. And the wounds of different conflicts, centuries apart, striking members of my family by the same river. John H. Daniel would recover from his wounds, get wounded again later in the war, get captured while lying in a hospital and taken prisoner, and finally get released to go home after the war. And, so what? Who cares? Dadgum Confederate. He was just fighting to preserve slavery, right? All those stupid Confederate Daniels must have been slave owners with big old plantations and their stupid sweet tea. And they fought to be able to keep their slaves, right? Why else would all of them fight for Dixie like that? Why did they? Well, when we come back, we'll discuss it. You're listening to The Tom Daniels Show. We'll be right back.
What are you waiting for? The Tom Daniels Show. What are you waiting for? The Tom Daniels Show. What are you waiting for? The Tom Daniels Show.
Welcome back to the Tom Daniels Show, and if my ears are correct, I am hearing a style similar to a Native American chant, right? Wow, how do you even do that? Mary Mac is the world's most perfect band. Now, we've been talking about my family tree again and how I'm descended from the uncle of Pocahontas, as well as a big old wad of Confederate soldiers, obviously fighting to preserve slavery. I should be embarrassed and ashamed, right? I mean, all Confederates were racist degenerates who deserved nothing except our contempt. And the desecration of their statues and memorials is totally justified, right? Who cares about historical accuracy? These things have got to go. Who's with me? Well, that's what we all learned in school and continued to learn on the 24-hour news cycle. And the problem is that people don't really want to learn anything new. That makes them uncomfortable. They just want to reinforce what they already believe so they can rest easy every night. History really sucks when it has the nerve to crawl out of those neat little categories and create a crisis. In the 1999 film, The Matrix, there was a pivotal scene called Red Pill, Blue Pill, and it was so transformational in that movie that it became part of our cultural lexicon. Even Wikipedia contains a really remarkably accurate description of this phenomenon, which it explains as follows, quote, "A choice between the willingness to learn a potentially unsettling or life-changing truth by taking the red pill, or remaining in contented ignorance with the blue pill. This episode of Tangled Roots is now offering you the red pill. It's intended as a challenge. Are you ready to push past all the memorized slogans, learn something new, and blow up the standard narrative? And take the red pill. Follow me. Oh, and by the way, this is the truth. It's not just hearsay about an old family legend. What I'm about to relate next are facts backed up with hard documents that I've seen with my own eyes. As mentioned earlier in the episode, the Daniel family patriarch that brought the family to Alabama was my fourth great-grandfather, Theophilus William Daniel, who married Penelope Goodson and set up the homestead in 1817 in what would become Butler County, Alabama. As an Alabama farmer, he raised 14 children. He was a founder of the Sweetwater Baptist Church, and he was buried in the Daniel family cemetery near Seville, Alabama. He played a huge part in establishing the entire local communities of the area. There's actually a community in that vicinity named Danielville. In that part of Alabama, whatever the Daniel family said was the way it was. A few years ago, a Texas cousin of mine made a pilgrimage to the old Daniel family homestead site, and she was researching the records of the Sweetwater Baptist Church in the library at nearby Greenville, Alabama. There she found a reference that puzzled her, because they were apparently taking up a collection in church to buy someone. Oh no, slavery again. On page 29 of the original church records dated 9th May, 1829, it says, quote, "Appointed our brother, Mr. Armstrong, to draw a subscription for the purpose of the purchase of our brother Caesar B., and present the same to our next conference." And then on the next page, dated 13th June, 1829, it says, quote, "Received the subscription from the hand of our brother, Mr. Armstrong, for the purpose of the purchase, made by order of our conference of our brother Caesar B., a man of color, agreeable to the third article of our last conference." Okay, so why did they do that? And who was Caesar B.? Caesar Blackwell was a very popular, charismatic slave preacher who ministered to large, multiracial, standing-room-only congregations in Alabama, even though you were probably taught that was impossible in the South, right? A multiracial congregation? He was bought for $625, that's about $18,000 in today's money, by the Alabama Baptist Association, and then set free, where he became the associate preacher at the Antioch Baptist Church near Montgomery, which was a biracial church, something else you were probably taught was impossible. Wait, what? Did you say he was set free? Freeing slaves in Alabama before the war? Oh, that's got to be a misprint. No, not a misprint. According to a 1908 pamphlet, Slavery Laws in Alabama, it simply took an act of the state legislature to free a slave in Alabama. It was all perfectly legal, and apparently it was popular. There were so many of these petitions filed that the state legislature didn't have time to handle them all, and they were forced to hand over those duties to the individual counties. By the way, the act of an owner freeing his own slave is called manumission. I did not know that until I started assembling material for this podcast. Manumission, freeing your own slave. Learned a new word. And it was a thing in Alabama before the war. Although legislative records don't always mention slaves by name in the freedom petitions, it's noteworthy that Caesar Blackwell was, which was a typical indication of a free black man. And digging into the old records is very interesting because my cousin found a number of freed black men who then took the steps to free their own wives and children, and even their stepchildren. Additionally, Caesar Blackwell wasn't the only one by far. This wasn't just some one-off symbolic act, but a regular program of manumission by the Alabama Baptist Association. They purchased many other slaves specifically for the purpose of freeing them, and a large number of participating members were abolitionists, including my family. My cousin in Texas can only find one indication of a Daniel anywhere borrowing a slave for a temporary child care arrangement, although the slave was rented and not purchased. The slave was also paid wages as if it were any typical job, sort of like a side hustle. It was a deliberate choice by the Daniel family not to own other human beings, even while living in a slave society. Now, first of all, they probably couldn't afford it, and secondly, they didn't need to. Prior to the war, the Daniel family in South Alabama worked a huge family farm without slaves because they had their own tribe of children. John H. Daniel was one of 12 kids, and his father Abel was one of 14 kids, so the number of captive family field hands was always huge. Oh, it was forced labor, all right, but it was family labor. Please keep in mind that the Alabama Baptist Association wasn't some richly endowed trust. They had to raise all the money used to purchase slaves for release by passing the collection plate. And they would have never been able to raise the money for slave purchase in freedom without the support and generous donations of its member congregations, of which Sweetwater and my family were instrumental. It wasn't just some fringe idea. Any dissent among the church members would have resulted in the church splitting. If you're familiar with Baptists, you know what I'm talking about. Baptists are notorious for doing that. My mother used to tell a story about a local community that had one Baptist church and a congregation divided down the middle over air conditioning. Half wanted it, half did not. In true Baptist tradition, they split into two completely different Baptist churches. One had air conditioning, the other did not. So trust me, if members of the congregation were uncomfortable at freeing slaves, they would have split off. But here's the heart of the problem. We were taught that the war was all about slavery. You know, a bunch of northern boys all said, "Hey, come on, yous guys, let's all go south and free all the slaves. What do you say?" And the southern boys all said, no sirree, bobcat tail, y'all better get back, 'cause we fixing to fight to keep 'em. Okay, so maybe you weren't taught that exact version, but probably one pretty close to it. And if that's the case, how do you explain my family? Go ahead, I'll wait. Since the Daniels were obviously against slavery, why did they fight? And not just a couple of them, but all of them. Wouldn't it have been a lot easier to just step out of the way and say, "Hey, come on in and free those slaves. They're right over there. Help yourself. And if you want any sweet tea while you're here, just let us know." That's the million-dollar question. Since they obviously weren't fighting to preserve slavery, what were they fighting for? Go ahead, I'll wait. Is it possible that there was a lot more to this thing than we were taught? And certainly my family members weren't the only ones in the entire South fighting for a different cause than slavery. How many other causes were there to fight for? How many people? I think the big takeaway from all this is that it completely disrupts that monolithic narrative about the antebellum South and derails the belief that everyone who wore a gray uniform held the exact same beliefs across the board. When you consider real people with real lives, that narrative gets a lot more complicated and tangled. And once you've taken that red pill, you can't unsee it. As Dr. Seuss told us, maybe, just maybe, it's a little bit more. So what were they fighting for? Like Opechancanough, maybe a sense of loyalty to their community or their state. Like Opechancanough, maybe a sense of defending their homes from invasion. Like Opechancanough, maybe a sense of fighting for independence from an overbearing colonial power. Boy, it sure gets complicated, doesn't it? Just like Opechancanough, my family has always been true to their beliefs, too, and they never allowed themselves to be reconstructed. John Adams Daniel was forced to move his family all over the map after the war, seeking some kind of subsistence, first to Florida, then Louisiana, and then ultimately to Texas. They remained loyal to their culture and heritage and defiant to the end. They fought bravely for what they believed. And it doesn't matter if you're talking about the Daniel boys in the Southern Confederacy or Chief Opechancanough in the Powhatan Confederacy. In my family, they were all proud and independent. So, Pocahontas, an abolitionist, and a Confederate walk into a bar. The bartender says, "Wait, is this some kind of joke?" Well, in this case, I think the punchline is the setup. Thank you, everybody. This has been the Tom Daniels Show. Keep listening. Keep learning.
Keep learning, keep learning. The Tom Daniels Show. Keep listening, keep learning. The Tom Daniels Show. Take a break from your usual routine and tune in to the Tom Daniels Show. You'll discover the world of melodies and stories that you might not know. Keep listening.